The salty breeze kissed my face as I unloaded the car, the sound of seagulls overhead blending with the distant crash of waves. It had taken months to plan this trip, the perfect family vacation, something Heather and I used to look forward to back when life was simpler. A week at a beachfront resort was supposed to fix everything, the disconnection, the routines that had become more chore than joy, and the subtle changes in my wife that I kept pretending weren't there. Heather was already out of the car, stretching her legs and fixing her sunglasses, her sundress flowing in the wind. She looked effortlessly put together, as she always did, blonde hair curled perfectly, smile plastered on like she was auditioning for a catalog cover. I used to admire that about her, how she seemed to turn heads wherever she went, but lately, it felt different. More deliberate. "Daddy, come on." Ethan, my 7-year-old son, shouted as he barreled past me, his arms outstretched like a plane about to take off. His sister, Lily, followed close behind, giggling as she clutched her stuffed dolphin in one hand. "Go easy on your sister, bud." I called after him, but my voice was drowned out by their laughter. It was one of those moments, a fleeting snapshot of joy, that I'd been holding on to lately, as if by sheer willpower, I could freeze time and stop everything from unraveling. Heather, standing by the trunk, glanced at me and smiled. "You coming? We don't want to miss check-in." "Yeah," I said, shaking myself from my thoughts. "Let's do this." This trip was my idea. Work had been a grind for months, one endless meeting after another, my days blurring into a haze of emails, reports, and quick meals eaten at my desk. Heather had her own stresses, though hers were always more mysterious. "It's just life," she'd say with a dismissive shrug when I asked what was wrong. "Everything's fine." But things weren't fine. I felt it. Over the last 6 months, there had been this distance. Nothing obvious, nothing explosive. Just tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in the way she moved around me. Heather was still the doting mother, still the woman with a social calendar full of wine nights, brunches, and Pilates classes. To the outside world, she was perfect, effortlessly charming, enviably beautiful, and admired by everyone we knew. But I knew better. It started small. Her phone was always in her hand, even during dinner. Heather had always been active on social media, posting photos of Ethan's soccer games, Lily's dance recitals, her carefully curated life, but this was different. She'd turn the screen slightly away from me, and when a message popped up, she'd smile just a little too quickly before locking it. Then there were the late nights. "I'm heading to bed," I'd say, expecting her to follow as she always had. "You go ahead," she'd reply, her eyes glued to her screen. "I'm just finishing up this article." Some nights, I'd wake up to the faint glow of her phone lighting up the room. I never said anything, never demanded answers. Instead, I let it fester, convincing myself it was nothing. And then there was the way she looked. Heather had always taken care of herself, jogging, eating well, the occasional spa day, but now, it felt obsessive. She was at the gym constantly, her yoga pants getting tighter, the neckline of her shirts just a little lower. She'd buy expensive new outfits and tell me she just needed a pick-me-up. I noticed it, of course I did, but I told myself it was harmless. After all, what was I going to say? "Honey, why are you suddenly more attractive?" It felt ridiculous to even bring it up. So I didn't. The resort was every bit as beautiful as the photos on the website had promised. White sand stretched out endlessly under the clear blue sky, and palm trees swayed lazily in the breeze. It was paradise, and for the kids' sake, I forced myself to believe it could still be ours. The bungalow they'd given us sat just steps away from the beach, with a wide deck and sliding glass doors that overlooked the ocean. Ethan and Lily ran through the rooms, their excitement bubbling over. "Look, Dad!" Ethan shouted, pressing his face to the glass. "We can see the waves from here." I grinned, ruffling his hair. "Pretty cool, huh?" Heather walked in behind me, dropping her oversized bag on the couch. "This place is perfect," she said, her voice warm but distant, like she was already 1,000 miles away. "Yeah," I replied. "It really is." She turned to me then, her sunglasses still perched on her head. "Why don't you take the kids down to the beach for a bit? I'll unpack and maybe grab a quick nap." Her words were casual, innocent even, but something about them put me on edge. I hesitated, searching her face for something. "You're not coming?" She smiled. "In a bit. I just need a moment to myself." I nodded slowly. "All right. Come on, guys, let's go build the biggest sandcastle this beach has ever seen." Ethan cheered and took off like a shot, Lily trailing behind him. As I followed them out the door, I turned back one last time to see Heather pulling her phone from her bag, her fingers already tapping away at the screen. The afternoon passed in a blur of sun and laughter. Ethan and Lily were in heaven, their faces smeared with sunscreen and sand. My parents arrived shortly after, cheerful and relaxed, as if they'd stepped straight out of a postcard for grandparent goals. I kept glancing up toward the bungalow, hoping to see Heather walking down to join us. Each time, I found the deck empty, the sliding doors closed. "She's probably just tired," I told myself as I dug another moat around Ethan's lopsided sandcastle. "She'll come down later." By dinner, Heather had reappeared, looking refreshed and radiant in a sundress that hugged her curves just right. "You finally made it," I teased as we sat at an outdoor table overlooking the water. "Had to get my beauty rest," she replied lightly, pouring herself a glass of wine. She didn't ask about the kids or what we'd done all day, but I didn't push it. We ordered seafood, the kids got ice cream, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal. It was easy to pretend that the tiny cracks in our foundation didn't exist, that this vacation was exactly what we needed to find our way back to each other. Heather laughed at something Ethan said, and I found myself staring at her, trying to remember the last time I'd really looked at her, not just as my wife, but as Heather, the woman I'd loved for 10 years. She caught me watching and arched an eyebrow. "What?" "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm just glad we did this." She smiled back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. That night, after the kids had crashed from a day full of sun and sugar, I lay in bed listening to the waves outside. Heather was beside me, scrolling through her phone again, the faint blue light reflecting off her face. "Everything okay?" I asked softly. She glanced up like I'd startled her. "Oh, yeah. Just checking something for the PTA." I nodded, turning over and staring at the dark ceiling. The sound of her tapping at the screen continued for a while, then stopped altogether. "Good night," she murmured. "Night," I replied, though I didn't close my eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that this vacation, no matter how perfect it looked on the surface, wasn't going to end the way I'd hoped. It was the calm before the storm, and I could feel it. It was late morning, and the beach was alive with the sounds of crashing waves and children's laughter. Ethan and Lily were waist-deep in the water, shrieking as the waves knocked them off their feet. I stood nearby, hands on my hips, smiling at their boundless energy while Heather lounged under an umbrella, her sunglasses hiding her expression. She looked serene, stretched out on a chair with a paperback novel in one hand and her phone resting on her lap. "Dad!" Ethan called, waving excitedly. "Watch this." I grinned, grabbing my phone to snap a quick photo. Ethan and Lily struck goofy poses, drenched and grinning ear to ear. I wanted to capture every moment of this trip, our perfect family vacation, something we could look back on fondly years from now. Out of habit, I glanced toward Heather. "Babe, smile." I called. "Family photo." She didn't look up. "I'll pass. I'm not camera ready." "You always look great," I said, shrugging as I put my phone back in my pocket. The kids were already diving back into the surf, and I started toward Heather's chair to sit down for a minute. "Here," I said, holding out my hand. "Let me use your phone." The kids wanted a picture with the water in the background, and mine's low on battery. Heather didn't even blink. "Yeah, sure. Just don't drop it." She handed it over absent-mindedly, already flipping another page of her book. I took her phone, turning toward the kids. "All right, guys, line up." Big smiles this time. But before I could snap the photo, it happened. A text popped up on the screen, one of those brief message previews that you can't help but see. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you already. Ryan." Time slowed. My heart slammed against my ribs as my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Ryan? Who the hell was Ryan? And see you tonight? I blinked, hoping I'd read it wrong. Maybe it was from a friend, maybe. But no. Deep down, I knew. My hands started to tremble, my mind racing. I glanced back at Heather. She was still lounging, completely unaware, her face peaceful under the shade of her umbrella. I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned away, phone still in hand. "Stay calm, David," I told myself. "You don't know anything yet." I stepped farther away from her, pretending to take more photos. The kids were too busy splashing to notice me as I pulled the phone closer and swiped up to open the message thread. My pulse roared in my ears as I scrolled. What I found hit me like a punch to the gut. There they were, dozens of messages between Heather and Ryan. Texts sent late at night, long after I'd fallen asleep. Flirty comments. Explicit words I didn't even want to imagine coming out of my wife's mouth. "Last night was amazing. I can still taste you. I can't wait to sneak away again. Meet me by the bungalow after dark. Only a few more hours, and I get to see you in that swimsuit you promised." I felt sick. Each word was a dagger, driving deeper and deeper into the trust I'd spent 10 years building with her. My throat was dry, and my hands clenched the phone so tightly I thought I might crack the screen. This wasn't just an affair, it was happening here. At the very resort I had booked to bring us together. And Ryan. I scrolled back, looking for more clues. From what I gathered, Ryan was younger. A local to the area, maybe, or someone she'd met, by chance, during her solo workouts at the gym. I saw a photo he'd sent her, a quick selfie of his grinning, suntanned face. He had that cocky look, the kind of man who was all muscles and charm. A man who wasn't me. I looked up slowly, back toward Heather. She was still there, flipping through her book, sipping her drink like nothing had happened. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? And how could she sit there so calm, so comfortable, like she hadn't completely destroyed me with a single text? I pocketed her phone and walked back toward the water, trying to steady my breathing. The kids ran past me, laughing, oblivious to the world around them. For a moment, I envied their innocence, the way they could enjoy this perfect day without knowing it was all a lie. I felt like a fool. I'd planned this trip to reconnect with Heather, to find a spark we'd both lost. I thought we were just busy. That the distance between us was temporary, something we could fix. But now I saw the truth. She wasn't distant because of stress or routine. She was distant because of him. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I didn't trust myself not to lose it, to shout, to demand answers, to let my emotions get the better of me. No, if Heather thought she could play me for a fool, then it was my turn to play the game. I wasn't going to confront her with anger or accusations, I was going to observe, gather evidence, and get the upper hand. I needed to know everything, how long this had been happening, where she was sneaking off to, and, most importantly, how I was going to make her regret every second of it. Back at the bungalow, Heather was in the shower when I slipped her phone back onto the nightstand. My hands were steady now, my heart no longer pounding with panic. Instead, there was a strange calm, a cold focus that had settled over me. She walked out of the bathroom minutes later, wrapped in a towel, her face flushed from the hot water. "Hey," she said, giving me a quick smile. "Where are the kids?" "They're with my parents," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Thought they could use some grandparent time." "Perfect," she said, pulling her hair up into a bun. "I might go for a quick walk, then. Get some air." I forced a smile. "Sounds nice." She nodded, grabbing her phone as she disappeared out the door, humming to herself like nothing had changed. As soon as she was gone, I pulled out my own phone and scrolled through her texts again, this time from the photos I'd taken earlier. That evening, Heather sat across from me at dinner, laughing as she helped Lily cut up her chicken nuggets. I watched her carefully, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the smile she flashed at Ethan when he told a story about a crab he'd seen. She looked so normal, so genuine. And yet, I knew. It was strange, sitting there with her, pretending nothing had changed. But under the table, my hands were clenched into fists. My eyes darted toward the other guests on the patio, scanning for anyone who looked like Orion. I didn't know what I'd do if I saw him, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. That night, after the kids were asleep, I lay beside Heather in the dark. Her breathing was slow and even, but I wasn't fooled. She wasn't asleep. I knew her patterns well enough to know when she was faking it. I turned onto my side, staring at the ceiling as the sound of waves echoed through the bungalow. My mind replayed everything I'd read, the texts, the plans, her words. "Meet me by the bungalow after dark." I glanced at the clock. It was close to midnight. Slowly, I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. Heather shifted slightly but didn't move. "Just grabbing some water," I whispered, though I knew she wouldn't ask. I walked into the kitchen, filled a glass, and stood there in the dark. I could feel it, that storm brewing, just beyond the horizon. Heather thought she was in control. She thought she'd covered her tracks. But she had no idea. The next morning, the sun rose like nothing had changed, casting its golden light across the beach. But for me, everything was different. The knowledge of Heather's betrayal simmered beneath the surface like lava under a cracked volcano. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Heather showered, humming to herself, carefree, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't look at her without seeing those messages. "Ryan. Can't wait to see you tonight." The words were branded into my brain. By the time we hit the beach as a family, I had made up my mind. Today wasn't going to be like yesterday. I wouldn't just sit back and let her play her games. If Heather thought she could sneak around and make me the fool, I was going to show her how wrong she was. The kids were playing in the sand again, my parents watching them from a safe distance, their folding chairs sunk deep into the sun-warmed shore. I sat on a lounge chair, sunglasses hiding the sharpness in my gaze as I tracked Heather's every move. She was lying under the umbrella, propped up on her elbows, phone resting discreetly at her side. She kept glancing at it, like she was waiting for something. Or someone. The moments stretched into an hour, my anger smoldering quietly as I pretended to sip my lukewarm beer. Then it happened. Ryan. He appeared on the far end of the beach, walking toward us like he owned the place. Even from a distance, he stood out, tall, tan, confident. A younger guy, probably early 30s, with chiseled features and broad shoulders that looked like they spent more time in a gym than at a desk. Heather hadn't noticed him yet, but I saw everything. The way his eyes swept the beach until they landed on her, the flicker of a grin that crossed his face. He didn't even hesitate. He walked straight toward her, like a man walking into a room where he knew he belonged. My grip on the armrest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'd spent the entire night thinking about this moment, about how I'd play my cards. Anger wouldn't win me anything here, but strategy. That was my weapon. I stood up casually, brushing sand off my legs, and began walking toward Heather. She finally noticed Ryan as he drew closer. For a split second, her face lit up with surprise and what I could only describe as relief, before panic quickly replaced it. She sat up straighter, her phone slipping into her bag as she glanced around nervously. It was too late. "Hey there!" I called out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, waving as I approached. "Ryan, isn't it?" Heather's head whipped toward me, her mouth opening slightly. "David, what?" But I ignored her, my eyes locking onto Ryan. He slowed his pace, clearly caught off guard, his cocky swagger faltering as he tried to figure out who I was. Ryan smiled, hesitant. Yeah. Ryan." I extended my hand, smiling too wide. "David. Heather's husband. I've heard so much about you." His face froze, like a man who'd just been sucker-punched in public. "Husband?" Heather shot to her feet, grabbing my arm. "David, can I talk to you?" I pulled my arm free gently, my smile never wavering. "Relax, babe," I said coolly, turning back to Ryan. "We're all adults here. I thought it would be nice to get to know the guy who's been such a good friend to my wife." Heather's face had gone pale, her sunglasses doing nothing to hide the sheer panic in her expression. Ryan, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to disappear into the sand. He glanced at Heather, clearly searching for a lifeline, but she was frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Come on," I said cheerfully, gesturing to the lounge chairs. "Sit down. Join us for a bit. We're just soaking up the sun." "No, really, Ryan stammered, shifting his weight awkwardly. "Nonsense," I cut him off, my voice still calm but with an edge now. "Sit." Ryan hesitated, his eyes darting to Heather again, but when I didn't back down, he slowly lowered himself into one of the chairs. I sat down too, leaving Heather standing awkwardly between us, wringing her hands like she didn't know what to do. "So, Ryan," I said conversationally, leaning back and crossing my arms. "What brings you here? Work trip? Vacation?" Heather cleared her throat, her voice sharp. "David, I really need to talk to you." I held up a hand, silencing her. "We'll talk later, honey. Ryan and I are bonding." Ryan swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable. "Just, vacation, I guess." "Nice," I said, my tone deliberately light. "Heather loves this place, don't you, babe? So many memories here. Family vacations, romantic getaways." I let that last part linger, watching as Heather flinched like I'd slapped her. "David, stop," she snapped, her voice cracking. Ryan shifted in his chair, finally catching on. He ran a hand through his hair, looking anywhere but at me. "I should probably get going." I stood up abruptly, blocking his escape. "Oh, don't leave on my account," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "We were just getting to know each other." He froze in place, caught between me and Heather, whose face had turned bright red. "David!" Heather hissed, her voice low but furious. "Stop this. Right now." The anger she tried so hard to keep in check finally bubbled to the surface, but it didn't matter anymore. She had no control here. I leaned closer to Ryan, keeping my voice low enough so only he and Heather could hear. "I know everything," I said, the smile dropping from my face. "The texts. The meetings. All of it." Ryan paled visibly, his bravado crumbling into pure panic. Heather gasped, taking a step back like she'd been struck. "Get up," I said to her, my voice calm but firm. "Now." She didn't argue. For once, she did exactly as I said, following me as I turned and walked toward the rocks at the far end of the beach. The waves crashed loudly against the shore as we reached the secluded area, far from the eyes and ears of anyone else. Heather stopped behind me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face set in a mixture of anger, guilt, and fear. "David, what are you doing?" she demanded, her voice trembling. I turned to face her, and for a long moment, I said nothing. I just stared at her, letting her squirm under the weight of my silence. Finally, I spoke. "I know everything, Heather." Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "Ryan," I said, the name tasting bitter in my mouth. "The late-night messages. The meetups. The affair you've been having right under my nose." Heather's face crumpled, the anger draining from her expression. "David, no, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand," I said coldly, cutting her off. "I've seen the texts. I know what's been going on. You didn't even try to hide it. You're careless, Heather. Careless and selfish." Tears welled up in her eyes. "It's not like that, David. I never meant for it to happen. It was just. I don't know. I was lost, and—" "Save it," I snapped, my voice sharp. "You can keep your excuses to yourself. I've already filed for divorce." Her head snapped up, the blood draining from her face. "What?" "You heard me," I said, my voice steady. "Divorce. I've already filed the paperwork. And before you even think about playing the victim, let me remind you that I have everything. Proof of the affair. Every message. Every detail. You won't walk away from this looking like the poor, misunderstood wife. The kids stay with me. You can have Ryan." Heather broke then, her shoulders shaking as she sank onto a nearby rock, burying her face in her hands. She sobbed, loud, ugly cries that echoed against the rocks, but I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just emptiness. "This is your fault, Heather," I said finally, my voice cold. "You threw it all away." I turned and walked back toward the beach, leaving her there to cry alone. The next morning, the world looked the same. The waves rolled in gently, the sun lit up the horizon, and the beach resort buzzed with vacationers carrying on their picture-perfect holidays. But for Heather, Ryan, and me, the illusion was about to shatter into 1,000 tiny pieces. I woke up before Heather. She was curled up on the far edge of the bed, as if the physical distance could erase what had happened yesterday. I didn't wake her. Instead, I pulled on my clothes and stepped onto the deck, breathing in the cool ocean air. This was the calm before the storm, a storm I'd been orchestrating for days. Heather's tears yesterday had been real, but they hadn't moved me. A part of me might have felt pity under different circumstances, but not now. Not after the betrayal. I had spent the past decade being her rock, reliable, steady, the man who always put family first. And she had thrown that trust away for cheap flings and stolen moments with a guy who didn't even have the decency to sneak quietly. That's when I realized revenge wasn't just an option, it was justice. Around 10 a.m., I set my plan in motion. The kids were busy with my parents, building yet another sandcastle down the shore, which gave me plenty of space to work without worrying about them seeing anything. Heather was still inside, taking far longer than usual to get ready, probably debating whether to look me in the eye today. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through Heather's messages to Ryan. After reading them so many times, I felt like I knew him personally. I opened up a blank text to his number and began typing, keeping my tone casual. "Hey, meet me by the big rocks around noon. David will be with the kids. I miss you. H." I hit send and stared at the screen, the small message bubble disappearing. He'd take the bait, I knew he would. Ryan wasn't smart enough to question anything. Heather had likely built him up to believe he was some irresistible secret fantasy, and I was just the clueless husband in the background. It was almost laughable. When Heather finally emerged, her sunglasses perched on her face like armor, I greeted her with a casual smile, keeping my tone deliberately light. "Morning. Kids are with my parents again. You should enjoy the beach while you can. She hesitated, clearly wary of my sudden calmness. You're okay today? Of course, I replied smoothly, picking up my towel. We're on vacation, aren't we? If she noticed anything strange about my demeanor, she didn't say it. Instead, she grabbed her bag and headed down to the beach, clearly eager to avoid spending too much time alone with me. Fine by me. Her actions today would only make what was coming next even more satisfying. At 11:45 a.m., I made my way toward the rocks at the far end of the beach, the same secluded spot where I'd confronted Heather the day before. My phone buzzed. On my way. Can't wait to see you. Ryan. I almost laughed at the irony. I glanced up and spotted Heather lounging under an umbrella nearby, her phone in hand. She wasn't texting him. She probably thought she'd earned some distance after yesterday's disaster, but Ryan didn't know that. And now, I was going to deliver the final blow. I tucked my phone into my pocket and gave a small nod to a man standing a few yards away, blending in like any other tourist. He wore flip-flops, cargo shorts, and sunglasses, holding a thick manila envelope that practically screamed legal trouble. My process server. I had found him yesterday, thanks to a call to my lawyer, Matt, who had moved heaven and earth to fast-track the paperwork. Divorce, evidence of adultery, custody demands, I had it all documented. Heather's world was about to implode, and it was all going to happen in front of her dream man. Right on cue, I spotted Ryan in the distance, his unmistakable silhouette approaching confidently. He wore swim trunks and a tank top, like some vacation poster boy, completely oblivious to the disaster waiting for him. I stepped back, melting into the shadows of the rocks as Ryan strolled onto the scene. Heather hadn't noticed him yet. She was still under the umbrella, sipping her drink and scrolling through her phone, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering just behind her. Ryan looked around, clearly expecting Heather. His confusion lasted only a moment before the process server stepped out of the crowd and called his attention. Ryan Thompson, the server said loudly, just enough for nearby beachgoers to glance over. Ryan blinked, confused. Yeah. That's me. From where I stood, I could see Heather's head whip around, her sunglasses sliding down her nose as she spotted Ryan talking to a stranger. Her expression went from curiosity to horror in a matter of seconds. Excuse me, the server continued, pulling out the envelope. Could you deliver this to Heather Thompson? It's a matter of legal importance. Ryan blinked again, caught off guard. Wait, what? Heather? Heather bolted up from her chair, knocking over her drink as she scrambled toward the rocks. Ryan, no, she shouted, her voice cracking. Too late. The server turned smoothly and handed the envelope directly to her. Heather Thompson, he said, loud enough for half the beach to hear. You've been served. A collective silence fell over the area as Heather's trembling hands closed around the envelope, her face going sheet white. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She glanced at Ryan, then at me, standing calmly a few feet away with my arms crossed. David, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What did you do? I stepped forward, the calm smile never leaving my face. I think you know exactly what I did, Heather. It's called consequences. Heather's carefully composed facade shattered right then and there. Her hands clenched around the envelope as tears welled in her eyes. But instead of facing me, she turned on Ryan, her face twisting in fury. This is your fault, she snapped, shoving the envelope into his chest like it was a live grenade. I told you to stay out of sight. You just had to show up, didn't you? Ryan stumbled back a step, completely baffled. Wait, me? What the hell did I do? Do you have any idea what you've caused? Heather shrieked, her voice cracking as her composure unraveled. You were supposed to be discreet. Discreet. Now look at this. She waved the envelope in the air, her fury spilling out like a broken dam. Ryan, wide-eyed and clueless, stammered, "Heather, I don't even know what's going on." "What is that?" "It's a divorce," I said calmly, stepping forward. "And trust me, Ryan, you're not going to come out of this looking like Prince Charming." Ryan turned to me, still trying to catch up. "Divorce? Dude, Save it," I said flatly, cutting him off. "You're welcome to her now. Hope she was worth it." Ryan gawked at Heather, who looked as though her entire world had collapsed around her. She dropped onto the sand, clutching the papers, her shoulders shaking as silent sobs racked her body. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness. Just emptiness. Turning back to Ryan, I smiled faintly. "You might want to leave, Ryan. I don't think she's in the mood for company anymore." He hesitated, glancing between Heather and me like he couldn't decide whether to stay or flee. Eventually, he chose the latter, mumbling something incoherent before slinking away down the beach. Heather stayed on the ground, broken and humiliated, the manila envelope resting on her lap like the weight of her mistakes. I turned and walked away, back toward the kids and my parents, my steps calm and steady as if nothing had happened. The sun was still shining, the waves were still crashing, and life moved on. For the first time in days, I felt free. The sun was warm on my back as I approached the shoreline where Ethan and Lily were building yet another sandcastle. My parents sat a short distance away under the shade of a big beach umbrella, chatting and watching the kids with soft smiles. The world around me hummed with the noise of happy families, crashing waves, and carefree laughter, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Heather was gone. She'd stumbled off the beach after I delivered the final blow, clutching that manila envelope as if it might burn through her fingers. Ryan had disappeared, too, though he didn't look back at her once as he slinked away down the shore. For all her efforts to build a fantasy, to craft a picture-perfect world on a foundation of lies, Heather was now left with nothing, no lover to swoop in and save her, no excuses to lean on, and no husband willing to clean up the mess she'd made. But I wasn't thinking about her anymore. For the first time since all of this started, I felt like I could breathe again. "Dad!" Ethan's voice pulled me back to the present. "Check it out." I knelt down beside him and Lily, admiring their castle. The walls were uneven, a little moat had been dug around the base, and a flag made of a popsicle stick and a napkin fluttered proudly in the breeze. It wasn't perfect, but they didn't care. To them, it was everything, something they'd built together, something that mattered. "Wow," I said, genuinely impressed. "This is the best sandcastle I've ever seen." Lily giggled, patting one of the lopsided towers. "We worked really hard, Daddy." "I can tell," I replied, ruffling her sun-kissed hair. "You two are incredible architects. Can you help us dig the moat bigger?" Ethan asked, holding out a plastic shovel. "Of course," I said, taking it from him and sitting down in the sand. For the next half hour, I dug and built alongside my kids, letting their laughter and enthusiasm drown out the noise of everything else. There was no anger, no bitterness, just this. Pure, simple joy. After a while, I looked up and spotted Heather in the distance. She'd made her way to the far end of the beach, pacing back and forth with her phone clutched in her hand. I couldn't hear her, but from the frantic way she gestured, I knew she was yelling, probably at Ryan, or maybe at herself. I watched her for a moment, my gaze steady. There she was, the woman I'd shared 10 years of my life with, the mother of my children, the woman I thought I'd grow old with. I didn't feel sorry for her, not anymore. Betrayal had a way of shattering illusions, and now I could see her for who she really was. Heather wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, she was someone who had taken my trust, my kindness, and my loyalty, and treated it like it was worth nothing. And that was the hardest part. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the good guy, the loving husband, the supportive father, the man who always put his family first. I thought that if I did everything right, if I worked hard and loved hard, Heather and I would be happy forever. But relationships aren't just built on love, they're built on respect. And Heather had thrown that respect away without a second thought. As Lily sat next to me, carefully smoothing out a sand ramp for the moat, I looked down at her innocent face and made a silent promise: I would never let this destroy me. Heather's betrayal had ripped apart the life I thought I'd built, but it wouldn't define me. I still had so much to live for, my kids, my own happiness, and a future that I could rebuild on my own terms. I deserved better than lies. I deserved better than someone who would smile to my face while sneaking around behind my back. And my kids? They deserved a father who showed them what integrity looked like. A father who didn't let life's worst moments turn him bitter or cruel. Daddy? Lily's small voice pulled me from my thoughts again. Yeah, sweetheart. She pointed to a wave lapping at the edge of the sandcastle. It's getting closer. Is it going to knock it down? I smiled faintly. Maybe, I said softly. But we can always build it again. Her face lit up, and she nodded eagerly. Okay. After lunch, I watched as Heather finally stormed back toward the bungalow. She didn't look at me, she didn't look at anyone, really. Her shoulders were hunched, her sunglasses hiding her eyes, but her brisk, angry steps spoke volumes. It was clear that her call hadn't gone the way she wanted. Ryan was probably running as fast as he could in the other direction, and now Heather was left to face the consequences of her choices, alone. For a long time, I thought that seeing her like this would make me feel triumphant. That watching her lose everything would somehow make me feel like I'd won. But as I sat on the sand with my kids, I realized that revenge wasn't what satisfied me. It was clarity. The truth was on my side now. I didn't have to wonder or doubt or keep searching for answers that I didn't want to find. I knew who Heather really was, and I knew who I was, too. I was free. And freedom felt a hell of a lot better than anger. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, I stood on the deck of the bungalow, watching Ethan and Lily chase each other down the beach with their tiny sand shovels. My parents were sitting nearby, their smiles easy and content. Heather hadn't said much since returning to the bungalow. She'd disappeared into the bedroom, and I wasn't sure if she'd come back out again. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe it was easier for her to hide than to face the wreckage she'd created. It didn't matter. The divorce was in motion, and I'd make sure it was fair. No screaming matches, no messy fights, I didn't need to sink to her level. My lawyer had the proof he needed, and Heather had no room to argue. The kids would stay with me most of the time, and I'd make sure they felt safe, happy, and loved. This vacation might have ended differently than I'd planned, but in some ways, it was exactly what I needed. As I watched the sunset, Lily ran up to me, her cheeks flushed from the wind. "Daddy, look," she said, holding out a perfect seashell. "Can we take it home?" I crouched down, inspecting it. "Of course we can. It's beautiful, just like you." She beamed, wrapping her arms around my neck. "I love you, Daddy." My throat tightened as I hugged her back, holding on a little longer than usual. "I love you too, sweetheart." And I meant it. For all the pain and betrayal, for all the moments that had broken me, this was what mattered. My kids. My future. My freedom. I looked up once more at the horizon, where the sky bled orange and gold into the waves. Somewhere behind me, Heather was probably pacing again, blaming Ryan or me or anyone but herself for the mess she was in. But that wasn't my problem anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of her lies. I wasn't questioning myself, wondering if I'd done something wrong. I was done trying to fix something that had already fallen apart. Tomorrow, we'd pack up and head home. It wouldn't be easy. Divorce never is. But I'd face it with my head held high, knowing I had chosen integrity and truth. And as for Heather, she'd have to live with the consequences of her choices. The truth had become my greatest weapon. And now, I was free.